Right now, the democratic legacy is being warped and repositioned as a socialist agenda. How will you counter this perception? Because as they say in marketing, perception is reality.
Yeah.
And in doing so, restore the democratic ideals to their original truths.
Yeah. It's an important question, and we do this by not falling into this trap of labels that is being set and focusing first and foremost on the people.
Right.
So you can, and people use all kinds of labels to name this or to name that, and if you pay attention, you'll notice the only reason they're using those labels is to try to pit one group of us against the other, is to try to tear one part of our country away from the other, to divide us as a nation.
Mussolini was right when he observed that there are problems with both socialism and capitalism. Indeed, at their extremes, they look identical. The poor are disenfranchised and suffering, while the elite are enjoying the good life. Productivity and innovation drop precipitously and society crumbles. This is mostly a matter of the nature of capital, which is that it tends to consolidate, and that it is risk-adverse. The more capital consolidates, the more risk-adverse it becomes. As capital consolidates, investment in innovation is reduced so that eventually growth is stifled. This is how wealth inequality creates instability in an economic system. Moreover, contrary to Mussolini's claims, fascism is not a third way. It is not an alternative to socialism and capitalism. There is some merit in Mussolini's thesis that the people should work together as fasci to magnify their force as a soldier's power is magnified by his role in an army. Indeed, politicians say exactly this kind of thing all the time, that we are stronger together. Furthermore, the fasci is a prominent symbol in American political imagery. Among other notable appearances, it is part of the Lincoln Memorial, and it is part of the rostrum of the United States House of Representatives. But I digress. As far as I can tell, fascism is not an actual economic system. Further, fascism collapsed under the weight of Mussolini's demand for totalitarian rule and his tolerance for corruption, which he justified with a pseudo-Darwinian argument that it is natural for the strong of the species to dominate the weak. In any event, the history is that in practice, fascism did not look any different than the extremes of socialism or capitalism. I mention this because every modern economy is a blend of private property and public property, of free enterprise and social services. Of course, different sectors of an economy require different degrees of regulation. For example, planning for new schools or providing for the national defense requires more government involvement than operating a grocery store or manufacturing furniture. However, no economic activity exists completely free of regulation. Instead, all economic activity is interconnected in the way everyone is no more than 6 handshakes from Kevin Bacon. As a result, every government is under constant tension over how to moderate between creativity and the social need to minimize the harmful consequences of greed across the many sectors of a modern economy. One way to picture the tension between creativity and regulation is to think of a charioteer with a team of horses. If he does not control the reins, the horses will run wild and the chariot will crash. However, if he pulls too hard, the horses will not run their best and will eventually quit. This is the long way of getting to the point that Tulsi Gabbard is right. The labels capitalism and socialism are virtually meaningless today. Even a so-called capitalist economy such as America's includes huge elements of socialism, not the least of which was trillions of dollars to bail out the banks which defrauded the public. As a result, such labels are of no genuine consequence. What is important politically is what the voters demand, and that the elected officials represent those demands in the government process.
I understand what you're saying about labels, but that's how we define and understand where people come from ideologically and philosophically. So what about capitalism? Are you a capitalist?
See, here's the thing with all these labels, and as you said, how they're used to define people and where they're coming from. But as you see, so many of these labels are misused, misunderstood to the point
so how would you define
where people
yourself?
don't have any idea what they even mean anymore.
So you're not a capitalist?
I'm an independent-minded person. I'm a Democrat, and my sole focus and purpose is to figure out how we can best serve the people of this country.
Okay.
What the vast majority of the people want is not a secret. Less war, protect Social Security and Medicare, solve the crisis in medicine, improve the schools and infrastructure, and regulate corporate greed and exploitation. Unfortunately, these demands conflict with the priorities of the special interests. As a result, for decades, we've had politicians shamelessly make promises that they have no intention of keeping. The good news is that normal has been broken, and it appears that the public has little appetite to go back to business as usual. Trump did this. For all of his faults and foibles, he has led the way back to the ideals that made America great. Trump had the courage to speak the truth and to call out the political lie.
In 2008, in an interview with Wolf Blitzer talking about President George W. Bush's conduct of the war, you said you were surprised that Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi didn't try to impeach him. You said, quote, which personally I think would have been a wonderful thing, close quote. When you were asked what you meant by that, you said, for the war. For the war. He lied. He got us into the war with lies.
Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake, all right? The war in Iraq, we spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives. We don't even have it. Iran is taking over Iraq with the second largest oil reserves in the world. Obviously, it was a mistake.
So
George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty. We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East. They lied.
Okay.
They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction.
All right. Governor Bush.
Trump made it possible for others on the national stage to do the same thing.
Now, I served in a war in Iraq, a war that was launched based on lies, and a war that was launched without evidence. And so the American people were duped. So as a soldier, as an American, as a member of Congress, it is my duty and my responsibility to exercise skepticism anytime anyone tries to send our service members into harm's way or use our military to go in and start a new war.
When Trump said these things, many people were shocked and horrified. Few were able to shed the emotional trappings in which they had been ensconced. However, the public has acclimated to the disruption. Thus, when Tulsi Gabbard offers the same quite obvious and quite true criticism, it does not create any stir. Instead, it is evocative of a new and better normal.
As president, would you trust the conclusions of your government?
Well, like I said, we have in our recent past a situation where our own government told lies to the American people and to the United Nations, for that matter, to launch a war. So what I'm saying is it is our responsibility to exercise due diligence, to ask the tough questions, to get the evidence before we make those very costly decisions about how and when and where our military is used.
Trump has also shown that a politician can represent his voters. Whatever one might think of Trump's policies, appointments, and methods, few would dispute that he is doing exactly what he said he would do. That is, within the constraints of the entrenched bureaucracy and his own dysfunctional administration, not to mention the burden of completely bogus investigations. In conclusion, we appear to be at an inflection point in our history. Trump has kicked the door in, and the voters are poised to demand representation from the politicians. The voters are poised to reject the standard change message delivered with the standard lies wrapped in the standard platitudes. I have the abiding faith that a sizable majority of the voting public understands that the reason why America is such a mess is because of politics as usual, and that there can't be any going back. Needless to say, the voters are up against decades of conditioning by the well-financed science of political division. Moreover, the ruling class will work tirelessly to intensify divisions in the public over such issues as abortion, gun control, and intersectional grievance. They will also seek to control all communications. Look around. They are already at work, and their work is already paying off. There is almost no place in social media free of argument. Argument over the stupidest shit. Hopefully, people will listen to Tulsi Gabbard for a few minutes. This should be long enough to realize that there is a better future in the new normal. 90% of the people agree on 90% of what is subject to political oversight. If we can take care of this and make America prosperous again, I am confident that the points of genuine division will eventually resolve themselves. This might not be Tulsi's time, but the new normal is here. If the voters don't jump at this opportunity and instead stick with a flavor from the old ice cream shop, America will go the way of ancient Rome. Look around. It's already happening.